All right, welcome everyone. We are going to be doing a little mini set review for Zendikar Rising. If you're watching this, the set is probably already available on Arena or will be shortly. I plan on getting it up around Thursday morning, so it should be coming up this afternoon if you're watching on Thursday. If you haven't looked at any of the spoilers for Zendikar Rising, this is obviously going to contain spoilers for the set. If you're interested in seeing what the set's about and some of the cool stuff going on in it, we will be looking at a couple top 10s. I put together a few lists of cards I'm excited to play about, cards I am interested in the design for mechanically. I find them very interesting. Cards that I think are going to have a constructed impact, and some art appreciation, because there's some pretty cool artwork in this set, including a new artist I haven't seen before. I'm not going to say for sure that he's new to Magic, but this is the first time I've really recognized his artwork, and I really like the style for it. So we'll be looking at some cool artwork for the cards at the end. So yeah, we are going to jump into our numbered list. First, we're going to go through the cards that I am excited to play with. These are ones that I think I'll probably feature fairly commonly in my Jank Tank episodes. We're going to start off first with a pretty modest card, the Cleric of Chill Depths. This is a 2-mana 1/3, and when it blocks a creature, that creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. This is a really modest card. It's not going to have a huge impact on killing your opponent, but I think this is a great blocker. Against mono red, this is going to slow them down significantly. At 3 health, it's out of shock range, but if they have 3 mana or 3 damage burn, stuff like Scorching Dragonfire, they can still just get rid of it. But it's probably going to dodge most 1 mana removal. And even if they go for a pump spell, something like Infuriate or like a +3/1 trample, that sort of thing, the creature that they're using to go over the creature is going to remain tapped next turn. For 2 mana, it just buys you a lot of stabilization time. So I feel like it's a good tool for decks that want to take it a little bit slower. Any deck that runs blue, I feel like this might be my Mire Triton for blue. Just a cheap creature that does its job pretty well, which is keeping you from getting killed really quickly. There's probably some synergy in terms of keeping it alive as a creature. If you take a normally lethal block with it that would die and then do some sort of pump spell with it, you're getting extra value because your creature's going to stick around a little bit longer. But I think it's just a good functional card. I'm going to play it in a lot of my blue decks, I expect. Maybe I'll be disappointed, though. Moving on to number 9, we've got Malakir Rebirth. This is a 1-mana instant. Choose a creature, you lose 2 life, and when that creature dies this turn, you put it back into play under its owner's control. So for a single black, you can save one of your creatures. It costs you a little bit of life, but it's a pretty good tempo swing if they're trying to kill something. You just get it right back. There's no limitations on like creature with 3 or less mana cost or 2 or less power or anything like that. It's not even your own creature, but if you use it on their creature, if they own it, they'll get it back. But if, say, they steal your creature and fling it or sacrifice it, you can use that to get it back. And this is one of the modal double-faced cards. If you haven't seen this mechanic, a lot of the cards in Zendikar have 2 sides. One is their normal spell side, and the other is a land. For the most part, those lands simply come into play tapped and add 1 color. So this Malakir Rebirth, if you don't need it as a spell, you can turn it into a tapped land for a swamp. And there are a lot of cards like that in the set. I think it's a pretty interesting idea. By necessity, both halves of the card have to be subpar, otherwise you have a normal card with more upside. So it's really hard for me to evaluate these cards, but I think this one is one of the better ones. The Malakir Rebirth side is really playable, and if you're in a situation where you can't play it, you got the land for it. Next at number 8, we have the Leyline Tyrant. This is a 4-mana 4/4 flying dragon in red. 4-mana 4/4 flyer is a baseline great stats for me. I'm pretty much happy with that, even if it doesn't have any good abilities on it. It's just a good rate for a creature. So this one has the ability that your unspent red mana doesn't disappear from your mana pool. You can cycle it or float it from phase to phase and step to step, and even turn to turn. So once the Tyrant dies, you can spend all of your red mana, or any amount of it that you want to deal that much damage to any target, including an opponent. So if you end up being able to float extra amounts of mana with your Leyline Tyrant, then whenever he goes away, presumably when he dies in combat or to a removal spell, you can end up taking out another target of importance, maybe even your opponent. If you get to untap with him, then that's pretty bad news. So the big question for resolving the Leyline Tyrant is he going to die immediately? And that's a pretty good deal for a 4/4 flyer. Like a 4-mana investment that says answer me immediately or lose the game is a pretty good rate. If you do get to untap, then you get all of your red mana, and whenever the Tyrant dies, you get an extra 5 damage. That's either, at worst, it's like a 2-for-1. They spend removal to kill the Tyrant, and then you get 5 to kill their best creature. At best, that just kills them at the end of the game. You deal 5 damage to their face, and they're done. So I'm expecting good things from the Leyline Tyrant. I want to play him with Ironcrag Feet. You get 7 red mana, you just cast a Leyline Tyrant and bank that 3 red mana. And then if they kill him right away, you've got 3 extra damage going somewhere. And if you untap, then you're looking good. At number 7, we've got Windvala, Shield of the Seagate. This is a 3/3 flyer for 3, which is, again, a very good rate. So I like seeing that, especially if it's got good upside to it. I've seen people pan this Windvala because she has a party ability, and a lot of the party abilities are not great unless you can get a lot of situations and stuff in play, which is difficult to achieve. So her party ability is if you have a full party at the start of combat on your turn, that is if you have a rogue, wizard, cleric, and warrior in play, then you can choose one of their permanents, and it can't attack, block, or activate abilities until your next turn. So you can knock out one of their blockers, and they can't even swing back at you with that card. But you have to have a full party in play, which is her plus 3 other specific creatures. Seems hard to work with. But her good ability, the one I actually plan on using, is her second ability. Sacrifice Windvala, choose Hexproof or Indestructible. All your creatures gain Hexproof or Indestructible until end of turn. Dauntless Escort was an older Alara creature that was a 3/3 for 3 that sacked to give all your guys Indestructible. And he was great. He was played very, very commonly. This is a version that substitutes the green for blue, and in exchange you get flying on it, as well as the ability to get hexproof instead of indestructible if that's better for you. So Windvala is all upside. I'm already happy playing a 3/3 flyer. Something that'll protect my whole board is a great, great investment. So I see myself playing Windvala quite a bit. Moving on to number 6, Relic Robber. This is a 3 mana in red haster. It's a 2/2, but his power is not super relevant. What you're trying to do is when he deals combat damage to the player, you give them an 0/1 colorless goblin construct that can't block, but it deals the damage to them at the start of their turn. So every time you can get him in for damage, he's going to put another clock on your opponent, kind of like the Chandra 6 mana emblem. This is an 0/1 construct, so it's not going to be attacking you. It's not going to be blocking, so unless they have a way to sack it, it's eventual death for them. The trick is getting in with a 2/2 that's a turn 3's play. Sometimes you might be able to get that first attack in if your opponent's a little slow, or if they've tapped out and attacked you, you might be able to find an opening. But if you're going to get multiple hits in with him, you're going to need something to give him unblockable or evasion or something. So that's the real trick there, is sneaking him in for some damage and then trying not to die while you slowly kill them. I don't think he's very good, but I'm going to see if I can pull off some shenanigans with him. Number 5, we got Coveted Prize. This is another party payoff. It doesn't need a full party to be good, but it definitely helps. So this is a deck search. It costs 5 mana, but it costs 1 less for each creature in your party, up to 4 if you have a full party. So that means that if you have a full party, then you pay 1 and search your deck for any card. The catch is that if you have a full party, then you can pay, or you can play that card, or you can pay any card from your hand that costs 4 or less without paying for it. So you can fetch up, if you have a full party, fetch up something that's going to help you close out the game and win on the spot, and play that for free. So I'm excited about this because I think there's got to be a set of cards here that will actually win the game when you just pay a black. You play your last creature for your party, you pay a black, find your card, and win. There's got to be, I haven't figured out the full deck list, but there's got to be a way to make this the end game for a party deck. At number 4, I got Fireblade Charger. This is a very simple 1/1 for 1. When it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So this is kind of like a Footlight Fiend. When it dies, it deals 1 damage to something. I've played Footlight Fiend in a lot of decks. This has the potential upside of, if you have pump spells, like a Sure Strike, like an Infuriate plus 3 power, when it dies, it's going to deal an extra 4 damage instead of 1. So that's really sweet. And you can give it haste by equipping it. And obviously, if you put a power buffing weapon on it, then when it dies, it's going to deal that damage with a power buff. So I think Fireblade Charger's got a lot of potential. I think we're going to see it in some constructed decks, just because it has the ability to do a lot of damage. At number 3, I've got Null Priest of Oblivion. This is a very efficient 2-mana black creature. It is a 2-1 with lifelink and menace, so that's a pretty sweet deal. If your opponent is light on blockers, you can get in for some damage that's also going to keep you alive. It makes it very hard to race this creature, because unless they're leaving back 2 blockers, you're going to be able to deal damage and buffer your own health. But the cool part about it is that it has a kicker for 4 more, to bring it to a total of 6 mana in black, to reanimate any creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, as well as get you, of course, the 2-1 creature as well. I like the way that this synergizes, because early in the game, you don't need the reanimation, right? But a 2-1 lifelinker, much like a Mire Triton, will help keep you alive. It'll block and trade, gain you a bit of life, and bide your time. But at the end of the game, it's obviously going to do a lot more for you, because it can resurrect any creature from your discard pile for a pretty modest cost. 6 for 2 bodies is not too bad, and if one of them is cheating something big into play, then you're doing pretty good. If it's like a last ditch trying to save your life sort of situation, having a 2-1 lifelinker as a blocker is going to be pretty helpful. Unless they're flying, of course, but it's a 2-mana creature, so how much can we actually expect from it? I think for its price, it's offering a pretty reasonable deal, and I'm looking forward to trying it out in a lot of mid-range decks. At number 2, we've got Roost of Drakes. This is probably the best kicker payoff card I've seen. There's a lot of kicker synergy in blue and green. It's kind of their color pair theme. But Roost of Drakes is the one that really has me excited, because it's got the right price to it. For a single blue, it is an enchantment that will make a 2-2 Drake for you every time you kick a spell. Now, I don't normally plan on kicking a lot of spells, but the icing on the cake for Roost of Drakes is that it has kicker itself. And when you play it, if you kick it, then you get a 2-2 Drake, and if you have one in play, you get a 2-2 Drake. So it fuels itself. If all you have are a couple Roost of Drakes, you're going to get a small Drake army just by those cards. But what I mean is, if you play 1 Roost of Drakes and don't kick it, next turn you kick a Roost of Drakes, you're getting 2 Drakes, and every spell after that you're kicking, you get 2 Drakes. If you have any other reasonably costed kickers, I'm not talking about like the 7 and 8 mana kicker spells, while swingy and explosive, those are not really what I usually go for. But if you kick other spells, there's some pretty cheap costed kickers, and if you use those, you can make an army of Drakes pretty much on command. So I'm looking forward to spamming a lot of Roost of Drakes and just kicking stuff for value. And the nice thing, too, is if you are kicking spells, it's expensive and you need to buy time, right? If you are making 2-2 chump blockers, that gives you the time to actually get to your bigger kicker cards. So it does work with those 7 and 8 mana kicker cards by buying you time and keeping your opponent busy while you get to that mana level. So I think it's probably going to be an okay deck. I'm not expecting it to be a tier 1, but I'm going to build with it. And finally, the card I am most excited about for this set is I'm going to go ahead and call that this is actually a pretty bad card, but I have a deck that I want to build with this, and it's probably going to be the first one that shows up on the Jank tank, and it's probably not going to work at all, because I feel like it needs copies of itself to be good. Valakut Exploration is a 3-mana red enchantment, and whenever you landfall, whenever you play a land, you exile the top card of your deck, and until end of turn, you can play that card. At the end of your turn, any cards that you didn't play go to your discard pile, and you deal that damage to your opponent. So if you hit another land that you obviously can't play, then that's just going to go to your discard pile and shoot your opponent for 1. So landfall deal 1 to your opponent by itself is decent. But the ability to get stuff off the top, I'm really going to miss for this. I'm going to miss the all the cheap the Rakdos card, Spectacle. Where you can just shoot for 3 damage with 1 mana, or exile 2 cards and play those for 1 red mana. I'm going to miss having access to those with this style of deck, but I want to play this with a couple other cards in the set and just play a bunch of lands every turn with like Azusa. Being able to chain lands off the top of your deck with Azusa and get more cards that way could be pretty explosive. So I want to see the potential of this, but I feel like it's not going to ever take off. I don't think that I'm going to make a viable deck with it, but I am looking forward to trying. All right, next we're going to look at the top 10 most interesting card designs. These are cards that illustrate or explore some useful mechanical space that I really liked in Zendikar, either the way they worked or new ideas for them. And our first example for this is the Kabira Takedown / Kabira Plateau. This is another modal double-face card that can be played as a plains, or it can be played as Kabira Takedown, which is a 2-mana instant in white that deals damage equal to the number of creatures that you control to a creature or planeswalker. So this is direct white damage. Typically, this is limited to attacking or blocking creatures. White's creature removal has always been conditional, usually based on combat or creature size. It's good at destroying large creatures, or it's good at destroying attacking creatures. This is one of the few cases where it just deals damage to a thing. It says, I don't like this, and I'm going to deal damage. That's not too unusual for white, because direct removal is pretty common in white. We've had stuff like Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, and other exile-based effects like Banishing Light and Oblivion Ring. It's just a little strange for it to be in the form of damage rather than exiling for white. Reminds me of like Sunlance back from Time Spiral block. So I like it. I also think this is a pretty good card. You're going to be able to play it as a land, so this feels pretty comfortable fitting into your land slots, but gives you extra flexibility to deal removal. So I think it's going to be a very high pick and limited. It's an uncommon, so we won't see too many of them, but it'll be played pretty much every time it's picked, in my opinion. At number 9, we've got Skyclave Cleric, which is also Skyclave Basilica. This is another double-faced card. And I like this one because it presents an interesting choice for the modal setup. This is a card that you can tell, not based on when you draw it, whether you want this side or not, but depending on your matchup. You're going to play this as a land unless you're playing against a burn deck. And if you're facing an aggressive red deck, then this is a perfect... You'd love to play a 2-mana 1/3 that gains you life. It just does the thing that you need it to do. And in matchups where it's not relevant, you can play it as the land. So this is kind of like a situational pre-sideboard sort of thing. If you are playing in a best of 1 queue, then you can put it straight in your main deck in the land slot and just accept that you're going to be a little bit slower. You're playing some tapped lands, but your matchup against red decks is going to be much better. And it's just one of the interesting dichotomies for these modal cards. You have a couple axes that you're evaluating them on, right? You've got, in this matchup, I want to use this side versus this side. But you've also got, I want this side when it's late game and this side early game. And this is one of those where it's not dependent on the time of the game, it's dependent on your matchup. And I really like that. And I don't think this is a terrible card. I'm not sure it's really going to be a mainstay in Constructed, but I could see it fitting into some decks depending on what you're doing. It's just reasonable. Both sides are not amazing, but given the choice between the two, it doesn't have to be amazing if it's, filling out your basic plane slots, for example. So moving on to number 8, we have an example of why you might not want to do all of your lands as these modal cards. This Hagra Mauling is a very interesting concession where someone on the design team probably thought, well, if we're making all of these lands, is someone going to try and make a deck that just doesn't run basics, that just has spells in every slot and uses all these double-face cards for their lands? And this seems like a concession to that. They said, well, if an opponent is doing that, Hagra Mauling is one of their safety valves that will punish those players. This is a kill spell at instant speed that costs 1 less if an opponent controls no basic lands. So if your opponent's just playing fancy duels and these modal cards that are spells, this helps you deal with it a little bit. The catch is that I don't know if it's really good enough. And this is, again, I'm probably underestimating it because it is a double-face card itself and you can just play it as a land. But typically, if I have a removal spell in my hand, I'll want it. So this is one of those where your opening hand has a land and this in it. You're like, okay, well, I've got to play this hand might be keepable if I play this removal spell as a land. So that's fine. And 4 mana to kill a creature is okay at instant speed. It's not amazing. Like, Murderous Rider's got a lot more upside over this. And is also flexible in what it gives you, a creature or a kill spell. But I was really intrigued by the design for it. They're like, we need a safety valve in case people go crazy and don't play basics. This is our answer. This also might be an intent. They're trying to get it to be played in older formats like Legacy and Modern, where you're basically covered in duels and fetches, and you don't play basics because you don't need to. But I don't know if I don't play those formats, but I suspect that a 3-mana kill spell is not going to be sufficient to make this work. Like, they're more interested in these like 2-mana instant removes that kill a creature that costs 2 or less, sort of thing. Incidentally, there is one of those in this set that I'm going to talk about shortly. So it's an interesting design thought that they had. I don't know if the payoff is quite good enough. I would have rather seen it say, instead of costing 1 less, be like, draw a card if they have no basics or something like that. So I don't know. I'm curious to see if this catches on. I think it's not going to be flexible enough. I think it needed to say Planeswalker on it to really seal the deal. But it's a removal or a land, so that flexibility might just make it worthwhile, regardless of the extra text about cost reduction. Because I don't expect to see that in Standard very much. It's going to be a rare deck that doesn't have a basic in it. The basics are still enabling the Eldraine castle lands, and those are quite worthwhile on their own. So it's nice to have forests and plains, but maybe people will be playing 3-color decks that run all the triomes, so we'll see. Moving on to number 7 here, we have Anti-Cognition. This is a simple counterspell. It hits creatures or planeswalkers, so it does not hit instants or sorceries or artifacts, unless they pay 2. So this is a quench. It's limited in scope, but it quenches. But if your opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, instead counter that spell and scry 2. So the problem with quench, of course, is that at the end of the game, you can't always hit the spells that you need to. You might be able to hit like a turn 7 Dream Trawler sort of deal, which is sweet, but it's not reliable. Sometimes you'll be needing to counter like an Uro or something, and they just have the mana to pay for it. So this is a spell that is very good on turn 2 and turn 3, and then later in the game, it becomes very relevant again, countering just straight up countering a creature or planeswalker and scrying 2. That usually costs 4-ish mana in my experience. So I think it's going to be a useful tool for mill decks. I just like the modality of it. It really buffs up when you need it to. I don't know if it'll see a lot of play, because not being able to hit instants and sorcery is a bit of a downer. But counter a spell and scry 2 is a really good deal for 2 mana, so it may very well. Moving on to number 6, we've got Bloodchief's Thirst. This is the spell I was referring to 2 cards ago with the Hagra Mauling. This card is a removal spell at 1 mana that attempts to maintain mana parity with your opponent. For 1 mana, you can destroy target creature or planeswalker with converted mana cost 2 or less. But if you kick it for 3 more mana, bring it to a 4 mana removal spell, then you can destroy any creature or planeswalker. So this is kind of similar to Easy Prey from Ikoria, where you could destroy a creature with, I believe it was power 2 or less. It might have been mana cost 2 or less. But you could destroy a small creature, but you could also cycle it for 2 mana, which I thought was great. So, you have a card that is very good early on, and then if you no longer need to kill a 2 mana creature, you can get rid of it. This is very similar. For the beginning of the game, it is efficient removal for a 1 mana or 2 mana creature, because you don't really want to spend Murderous Rider mana on a Scorch Spitter, because you're falling 2 mana behind, which is pretty relevant in some of those matchups where you're feeling compelled to kill a 1 or 2 mana creature. You don't want to overspend to do it. However, the drawbacks of those sorts of cards is that you can't really use them later in the game. They don't do a relevant thing. They solve that with Easy Prey by giving you cycling, so you could replace it. With Bloodchief's Thirst, they maintain mana efficiency by letting you spend more mana to kill more mana of their stuff. So I really liked that. I thought it was a good use of kicker to maintain efficiency, and it's a good kill spell. I don't know if people will play it because it's sorcery speed, and people really like their removal at instant speed, but I think that the flexibility is good enough to at least consider in a lot of cases. 4 mana to kill any creature is fine, and if it's letting you act early in a game to maintain stability and kill their cheap problems too, then I think that's probably worth the flexibility and extra mana later. Moving on to number 5, we've got Myriad Construct. This is a really cool one, I thought. I hadn't really... This reminds me a lot of like the Pentavis and Triskelion sort of counters on an artifact sort of build, but it plays out its counters when it dies, so it's not a recurring deal. So this is a 4 mana 4/4, which is pretty good for a colorless artifact, to be honest. And it's got all upside ability. You can kick it for 3 more mana to make it a counter on it for each non-land basic your opponent controls. So for 7 mana, it's more like an 8/8 or a 10/10, depending on how greedy your opponent's been building. Maybe more. So it's very, very big at 7 mana, but even as a 4/4, it's fine, because when it becomes a target of spell or ability, you sacrifice it, but you get to create a number of 1/1 colorless constructs under your control equal to its power. So if they go to kill it, you're actually going to spread its power among 4 different small creatures, which sometimes is a bad thing, but it's a lot of resilience. So I like it, but it does die to Wrath. It's pretty weak to Wrath effects. I just thought the idea for it was cool, though. You tackle it directly head on, and it just breaks into smaller fragments. It's a very interesting thematic thing. It's an interesting take on the illusion ability, where you have to sacrifice it when it comes to the target of a spell or ability. It doesn't feel bad, because you're like, oh, I've got these guys I can work with. So I like it, and I think it's got scary potential when you start kicking it, which is fine for a 7 mana spell, you know. It's nothing compared to Ugin just destroying the game as soon as you pay 8 mana. So I'm fine with that. I'm looking forward to seeing what people do with it. The prospect of pumping its toughness yourself, well, it doesn't really work, does it? You'd have to have an ability. You'd have to have equipment to do it, because you can't target it with your own Infuriate, or else you have to sack it before your Infuriate resolves. It's interesting. I like the card. I think people are gonna try it out. Going on to number 4, Trove Warden. This card reminds me a lot of another card from, I believe it was Zendikar. Yeah, it was the landfall ability, Admonition Angel. So Trove Warden is a 4 mana, 3/4 vigilance, so decent sized body. With landfall, when a land enters the battlefield, you can exile target permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less from your own graveyard. And then when it dies, you put each permanent that you've exiled into play under its owner's control. This reminds me of kind of a reverse Admonition Angel. I always liked Admonition Angel, but she didn't see a whole lot of play. This is a 6 mana, 6/6 flyer, which is pretty beefy. But she also Oblivion Ringed, or Banishing Lighted, a permanent every time you landfalled. You play a land, she would exile pretty much, I think it was any non-land permanent underneath her. And when she died, they got all their permanents back. This feels like the reverse. So the problem with Admonition Angel was that as soon as you killed her, everything came back. So she was great while she was in play and bad afterwards. Trove Warden builds up value. He's kind of mediocre on his own. But once he dies, you get a bunch of extra value. So I like that take on it, and I think for 4 mana is reasonable. I don't see it making much constructed play, but I really liked the kind of, not symmetry, but reverse symmetry to Admonition Angel. I don't think it was an intentional callback, but it felt very... The flow of the card felt kind of mirrored or parallel to me. I really liked it. At number 3, I've got Master of Winds. This is a 1/4 flyer that can switch its power and toughness when you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard spell. Normally, I'm not very keen on these switching power and toughness abilities because it takes other cards to do so. Creatures that can switch their power and toughness make like cool combat tricks, but I always felt like the cost to do so was a little difficult. It was hard to engineer a situation where you would want to. This being a 1/4 flyer can always present a threat of attacking your opponent for 4 in the air. But I'm going to go ahead and concede right now that this is a 4 mana creature, and we've already seen in red that you can get a 4 mana 4/4 flyer. It's just always 4/4, no matter which side it is. Like, you don't have to cast instant spells to do these cute shenanigans. I feel like it needs to get like Shroud when you do that, so they can't just ping it off. Or maybe whenever anyone casts an instant sorcery spell, you can switch it so if they try and use a removal spell on it, you can choose to switch it back. But I felt like I liked this one because of the flying and because it lets you draw 2 cards and discard a card. It gives you some fuel to go ahead and start doing that. It says we know this is a kind of a subpar creature and you're jumping through some hoops to get the value out of it that you really want. So we're going to give you some cards to try and make that happen. It seems very fun to me. And I like this sort of compromise for what would normally be a pretty subpar creature. No one's paying 4 mana for a 1/4 flyer. Even if it was like 0 cost. Like 4 mana, pay 0 whenever you want, switches power and toughness. I don't care. No one's going to do that because it's just the body's too weak. You'd have to put it on like a 3 mana creature. But if you're going to give me some cards, I'll consider it. I like cards. Number 2, we have Ashaya, Soul of the Wild. This is a 5 mana green elemental, and its power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. So that's pretty good already. It's going to grow every time you put a land into play. So 5 mana for a 5/5 at pretty much the baseline is reasonable. It should have a good ability, right? So this one does. It says non-token creatures you control are forest lands in addition to their other types. That means that they can tap for mana. And it also means that they are immune to a lot of removal that says non-land permanent, stuff like Assassin's Trophy, can no longer target your creatures, which I thought was really interesting. Board wipes that say destroy all non-land permanents, like Planar Cleansing, your creatures become immune to it. So that's really interesting protection. And then the other half of this that's been floating around my head is I want to play it with Heroic Intervention. What you can do with Ashaya, once you have 2 creatures in play, you can play Ashaya, and your other creatures tap for a green now, right? Now you've got a big beat stick in play, and you just hope that it doesn't die. You can save those 2 creatures that you've got in play already to have a Heroic Intervention in hand, and make all your stuff indestructible if you need to. So you tap out on turn 5 for Ashaya, and are like, you're great. You can't destroy my stuff now. It just doesn't work because I have Heroic Intervention mana open, even though I tapped out on turn 5. So I'm really interested to see if that's going to make any constructed splash. But just the design of turning your creatures into lands as upside is interesting. Typically, when I hear that someone has turned creatures into lands, I'm like, it sounds to me like turning lands into creatures, which is usually trouble. That usually means that they're going to destroy all of your lands. But this is kind of the reverse. This is your creatures become lands, and it's kind of a bonus protection for you. So I like it. I like it a lot. I think that it's got some tricky shenanigans, and it's also going to enable some very big spells. Exactly what big spells people are going to play off of Ashaya, I don't know yet. Don't know what someone's going to want to tap 12 mana for, right? It might just be Ugin. I'm going to be so bored if they're like, yeah, and I can use this to play Ugin. Great. And finally, at the top of our list for most interesting cards, we get Jace Mirror Mage. This is another 3 mana Jace. There are not a whole lot of 3 mana planeswalkers, and their impact is usually pretty low. But this one is particularly interesting to me. He has Kicker, first off. But let's look at his abilities first. He can +1 to scry 2. So for 3 mana, you can start scrying every turn. That's okay. He starts at 4 loyalty. So if you play this on turn 3 and go up to 5 loyalty, that's a lot of loyalty to take on early in the game, so he probably survives. And then you can use his 0 to draw cards. If he is in a stable position, you can draw a card and reveal it. And then you remove damage or you remove loyalty counters from him equal to that card's converted mana cost. So typically you'll want to scry first and then draw the land that you've left on top to draw that turn. That way you're not losing counters from Jace, and you can keep going with it. The kicker for him is you can pay 2 extra mana for a 5 mana planeswalker, and he makes a copy of himself, a token copy, that has 1 loyalty. And at that point you have 2 Jaces that both can activate every turn, and they synergize incredibly well. The 1 loyalty Jace will scry 2, and then the main Jace will use his 0 to draw the low mana cost card off of it. And that way you can activate both of his abilities basically in tandem, much faster. It's hard to protect because a 1 loyalty planeswalker, easy to snipe off. You just need like an errant flyer floating around to kill it. and he doesn't really provide himself any protection, which is the only reason why I don't think that this card is bonkers good. It is a cheap planeswalker that doesn't protect itself, and it doesn't typically draw you a card right when you play him. I don't think people are going to be very happy to play, even for 3 mana, draw a card, because it will not stick around. You're probably just going to lose that Jason. Paying 3 mana to draw a card is not good, especially if you have to reveal it. Paying 5 mana to draw 2 cards, still not great if you're just kicking him and getting a Jace token and drawing with him. It's not great, but when you're scrying and drawing, you are creating a bunch of extra hoops for your opponent to jump through in order to kill. So depending on the amount of control in this format, how slow things are, how good the bounce is, I think you can set up some pretty good Jace situations. All right, well, that wraps up our most interesting cards. It's now time for the top 10 that you guys have been waiting for. What I think the best, most playable constructed cards are. A lot of bad opinions. I mean, disclaimer, you guys have seen the Jank tank before, I presume. You guys know that I don't build great decks. That I play bad cards, so I'm not sure I'm the best person to take opinions about what the good cards are, but I'm going to give them to you anyways, and presumably you're still watching, so I guess you want some bad opinions. So here we go. The 10 cards I think are going to be the most relevant to Standard and maybe some other constructed formats. I don't know anything about Vintage or Legacy, and not really anything about Modern either, so we're mostly going to be looking at constructed Standard. The first entry on our list is Soaring Thought Thief. This is a card for rogue decks. It is 1 blue and 1 black, and it has flash and flying, so that's great. We're getting a 1/3 flyer with flash in a rogue deck. Rogue, the flash sub-theme for rogues I think is really great. It really captures the idea of, surprising rogue. So I like that a lot. And this rogue has a good ability. This is, as long as an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, which is kind of the rogue theme that we've seen building this set and last set, the core set. Rogues you control get +1/0. So all of your rogues that have flash that you're sneaking in with damage are going to get an extra damage in, including him. So this will be a 2/3 if you can get that mill condition met. And then whenever one or more of your rogues attacks, each opponent mills 2 cards. That's going to add up pretty quick, especially when we got like the Thieves Guild Enforcer. I think that's the name of it. The 1 mana 1/1 with Death Touch. It becomes a 3/2 when it's got when you've got 8 or more in their graveyard. I think that they're going to synergize really nicely. I think milling is going to be really accessible to Thieves between those 2 cards. When you play a rogue, they mill 2. When you attack with a rogue, and this has got evasion, you mill 2. You're going to be able to hit that 8 threshold pretty easily. The real catch is going to be making sure your opponent doesn't profit off of having stuff in their graveyard, which they can pretty easily. Any escape stuff's going to come back to bite you. You're filling it up for Uro, so it's really more of a drawback right now. But I think there's going to at least be a casual playable rogues deck, and I think this is going to show up in that deck. So I'm putting it at the bare minimum top 10. People are going to play it, but I don't think it's going to be the best competitive deal. At number 9, I think I've got a bit of a controversial include. These inscriptions, there's 3. It's not a full cycle, but there's one in blue, black, and green. And I like the green one the best. The inscriptions are a cycle that have kicker. You choose a mode, but if you kick it, then you get to do all 3, if you'd like, up to 3. So this one is 2 mana for an instant that lets you put 2 counters on a creature, or you can gain X life where X is the greatest power among creatures you control, or a creature you control fights a creature you don't control. 2 of those I want to do pretty regularly. 2 mana I think is a great price to pay for 2 counters on a creature at instant speed. That is a combat trick that is going to punch your opponent in the face every turn afterwards. And then 5 mana I don't think is unreasonable just to put 2 counters on a creature at instant speed and fight at instant speed. This is basically a bigger Hunter's Edge, and I think that at instant speed that 5 mana is absolutely worth it. And then the life gain is just kind of icing on the cake. So I could see this doing a lot of work, and I think people are going to play it in aggressive decks. I'm going to definitely try to shoehorn it in, but we'll see. I mean, I think it's reasonable at 2 mana and quite reasonable at 5 mana as well, so it gets my seal of approval. Going to number 8, we've got Crawling Barrens. This probably should be a little bit higher on the list, but I tend to favor creatures in my evaluations, and I think it's a bit of a flaw in how I look at cards. Crawling Barrens is a colorless card that's going to go in a lot of decks if you can fit the color requirements. Not for this card, but if your deck has slots to spare for a colorless land, Crawling Barrens is absolutely worth an include. So this comes in untapped, adds a colorless, and for the cost of giving up a colored mana land, a land that produces colored mana, you get the bonus of being able to activate it for 4 mana, put 2 counters on Crawling Barrens, then you can turn it into a creature until end of turn. But you don't have to if you don't want to open it up to removal. So this is a man land. It's a land that turns into a creature that can kill your opponent. Very good in any deck that wants to run board wipes. Very good against decks that run board wipes because it dodges all of them. And the opportunity cost for putting these sorts of man lands in your deck is pretty low. You are sacrificing some of your reliability of getting your colors, so it's not too bad if you're playing a 2-color deck. You're usually going to have both your colors, so this is very easy to throw in and give yourself options. Since it's colorless, pretty much every deck has the option of running it, so I think we'll see it in a lot of decks just because it's fine. Like, it's good. It's not dangerous to activate. It can turn into a monster. All I can say is that maybe 4 mana is a little expensive to be activating, but, when it's good, it's good. So if you're at 7 mana and are holding up a counter spell and you're just like, I want to kill my opponent, you can do so. The land will do it for you. You didn't have to draw a card. It's just a land. So it's very flexible, very powerful, and I think we'll see it in a lot of decks just because there's not much cost to using it. Next, we got Brushfire Elemental at number 7. This card has basically got all the right stats for the cost. If there is a red-green aggressive deck, I think it will run Brushfire Elemental. The Elemental is a 2-mana red and green creature with haste. It's a 1/1, so that's very hard to attack with. All of my time playing Dreadhorde Butcher has taught me that much, is that you can't really attack with a 2-mana haste if it's just a 1/1. But it has semi-evasion. It can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. So on turn 2, you probably can attack with it, actually. And every turn after that you make your lands drop, it's got landfall. Get +2/+2 until end of turn. So it is dodging all the chump blockers and attacking as a 3/3 for the rest of the game, basically. And if you're playing any sort of ramp, it's going to do a lot more. If you're playing fetch lands, it's going to do a lot more. Fabled Passage is still in standard, so that can make this attack as a 5/5 that you paid 2 mana for. So I'm just saying a 2-mana 3/3 is pretty good. It's got evasion, so it's not going to be chump blocked. I think it's got what it takes to be a critical part of the aggressive red-green deck. So if there is a deck that looks like that, I think this will be in it. I think I'm planning on putting it into my Valakut Exploration deck, but that deck needs a lot of work to become playable. So we'll see what ends up getting cut. Going to number 6, we have Legion Angel. This is kind of like Squadron Hawk's bigger cousin, but it doesn't play at all like Squadron Hawk. It just looks like it. So this is a 4-mana 4/3 flyer. That's okay. We've got more efficient 4-mana flyers. But when this enters the battlefield, you can go get cards outside of the game called Legion Angel. Just one per, but each Legion Angel will get another one, in essence. You can get another Legion Angel from outside of the game and put it into your hand. So you get basically a backup of your win condition. 4 mana flyer is enough to beat your opponent over the face, control their planeswalkers, and try and kill your opponent. If you back it up with protection and counterspell magic, it's fine. But if they kill it, you've got another one that you can just replay. And at that point, it's just pure card advantage. It is almost tempo parity. 4 mana is probably going to get killed by 3 mana. So you're losing a bit of an advantage there, but I think it's worth it for the card advantage you get. The trick with this card is finding the split. If you put all 4 in your main deck, you can't put any in your sideboard and it's a useless card, right? So do you run 1 and be like, well, I drew my Legion Angel. Now I get access to 3 in my sideboard. I think I've seen it suggested, and I think they're right. You run 2 in your main deck and 2 in your sideboard if you're running this card. You double your chances of getting it, and, you know, if you lose your third Legion Angel, exhausted your sideboard, things are going pretty poorly anyways. Hopefully you've gotten enough card advantage out of that whole exchange that you can recover without the help of more Legion Angels. That's my opinion. I'd rather draw into it more frequently and get 2 more copies than draw into it rarely and get 3 more copies. That being said, I don't think I really like this design for it. Because you're running 2 copies, if this card is really good and gets played in a lot of decks, your matchup can turn into this, he drew his 1 of card, or he drew that card that he has 2 of in his deck. He got luckier than me and was able to play his Legion's Angels. Whereas at 4, it's more consistent. Like, well, you can usually see this card most games, 1 if not 2 copies of it. It's less about, like, luck of who drew into their good card and more about how you use those good cards. Whereas if you're running 2 copies of Legion Angel, you're like, well, I didn't see my Legion Angel, so I lost. And that feels pretty bad. I don't like cards that are really swingy and dependent on, did you draw your singleton card? I feel like restricting a card is not a great balance decision in terms of, like, you can include 1 card in your deck. It's overpowered, so we're balancing it by just making it only 1 of. That doesn't really work in the actual game. Like, over a tournament, yeah, it might be balanced, but game by game, it's very random. There's a lot of variance to it, and I don't like that. And I think Wizards agrees with that because they don't really use restricted as a balancing tool in any current format. It's a function of vintage, and that's about it. So I think they're right about that. 1-ofs, like limit 1 per deck, is not a good balancing tool. This kind of echoes on that, and I don't think it's great. So hopefully I'm wrong and Legion Angel is not a great card and people don't play it. I think it's got some potential, though. At number 5, we've got Skyclave Apparition. This is a very strong white card that is removal. It looks at first glance like it is a creature-based Oblivion Ring. It is 3 mana for a 2/2 spirit. Doesn't have flying or anything. It's not that kind of spirit. It's just a 2/2 creature. And when it enters the battlefield, you can exile a target non-land permanent your opponent controls. The converted mana costs 4 or less. And normally, this would be followed by a clause that says when he leaves play, put that permanent back into play for them. However, the Apparition says, instead give them a blue illusion token, where X is the converted mana cost of the exiled card. So whatever you hit with this Skyclave Apparition is gone. It's not coming back. At best, they're getting a creature token, which you can kind of deal with. You know, a 2/2 or a 3/3 or even a 4/4 is usually a lot better than whatever it was that you exiled. Due to the timing of this as well, it doesn't use the until clause, so you can use flicker effects. So you play the Skyclave Apparition, you target something, but before the target to exile resolves, you flicker him. He leaves play and doesn't have any referenced exiled card, so he gives them no illusion token. But the trigger still resolves to exile their permanent. And then he comes in and exiles a second permanent that will get an illusion when he leaves play. So you can get kind of a mimicry of a Swords to Plowshares sort of effect, a blink effect paired with Skyclave Apparition, presuming they don't have instant speed removal to ruin everything, will exile a permanent permanently, as well as give you his ability again. So there's some good synergy and value here. He can answer a wide variety of threats. I wish it wasn't permanents 4 mana or less, because I'd really like to use him to kill planeswalkers. But it's a 3 mana creature, so it's fair is fair. Like, I think it's good. It is a good toolbox card. It is not too strong because it's only a 2/2 body. It's very vulnerable to removal, and it itself is not going to block their illusions very well. If you're running a pair of them, they kill your first one. It's not going to deal with that illusion. You still need a big creature to back it up. So it's not good on its own. It's okay on its own, but once they remove it, you're going to be in trouble. So I think it's a fine card. It's got a lot of good use, but it's not overpowered. But I think people will play it. Moving on to number 4, we have a card that is kind of, in my opinion, the replacement for Runaway Steamkin, in that it is a small body that It's a small body that grows to a significant body in short order. Magmatic Channeler is a 2-mana 1/3. So it's not an aggressive statted, it's more defensive. It's a bigger toughness than power. It's not going to be attacking your opponent for a while. But it says that as long as there are 4 or more instants or sorceries in your graveyard, it gets +3/1. So this is a 2-mana 4/4 at the end of the game. And he also lets you discard a card to exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one to play. That ability is going to take a lot of practice for me to get used to, but I think good players will be able to pitch some good stuff and get good stuff off the top of their deck to continue playing. It's a little unfortunate that he has to tap to do it, but I think this card is very good. I think that the right decks that want to play him will get him into a 4/4 mode very quickly, and he will be a good big body for cheap mana cost, which is why I compare him to Runaway Steamkin. Now, granted, the Steamkin becomes relevant a little more quickly, I think. It's the worst top deck because you don't have the red spells at that point to back him up, whereas the Channeler is going to fuel you for the rest of the game and or hit your opponent in the face. But the Channeler can't give you extra mana, and a lot of the blowout plays from Runaway Steamkin were just the fact that you could get 3 mana whenever you wanted. Turn 3 Torbrand, sure. I don't know about turn 3 Torbrand. That'd be pretty difficult. But 3 lands Torbrand if you're struggling to find your 3rd or your 4th land. Throwing down a Torbrand is going to do a lot of good for you, and the Channeler doesn't help ramp you into the good stuff. But it's a 4/4. You just have to cast some instant or sorceries. I like doing that anyways, so I think it's got a lot of potential in several formats. It's just good flexible value. It does the creature thing. It does the card advantage thing. I like it. Moving on to number 3, we have Luminarch Aspirant. This is a 2-mana creature that does a decent Ajani's Pridemate impression. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So playing this creature is a 1/1, but as soon as you go to your combat phase, the turn that you play it, you will turn it into a 2/2. Or you can put it somewhere else if you'd like. I am examining this card pretty much primarily in the thought process of buffing itself. I'm just planning on putting the counters on this cleric so it grows every turn. You play it on turn 2, and it's a 3/3 on turn 3, a 4/4 on turn 4, etc. You don't have to invest anything more than 2 mana to it. I think that's incredible. The downside to this Aspirant is that it's a bad top deck, like the Runaway Steamkin. It's going to take time to do anything. It doesn't have immediate board impact, but it's a 2-mana creature. There aren't a lot of relevant to late game 2-mana creatures, so I think for what it is, it's probably going to be one of the best creature-based, like aggro 2-mana drops that we have. It's a good thing that Ravnica is rotating out, because there are a lot of creatures I would like from Ravnica to put 1/1 counters on for free. I think there's probably going to be some good synergies regardless for this to combo with other creatures that really appreciate having those counters on them that I haven't really thought through and discovered yet, but I expect people to. This is basically a Quirion Dryad without any of the work. You don't have to cast the extra spells. It's just going to grow for you over time. Play it as a win condition on turn 2, and then just keep counterspell mana up. Like, it's a Brineborn Cutthroat without flash. I like it. It's a really, really, really good card. And I expect to see it in a lot of lists. Number 2, Thieving Skydiver. This is a powerful 2-for-1. So first off, it is a 2-mana blue 2/1 flyer. 2-mana 2/1 flyer, I always like. Usually they're like, oh, it can't block, but this is all upside. It's just, you pay 2 mana, you can start attacking for 2 every turn. I like that, especially in limited, but it's also got a kicker, and if your opponent has artifacts, you can basically pay the mana cost of that artifact as kicker to take that artifact. Any artifact. And if it's equipment, you could put it on the Skydiver, so it's a very strong counter to equipment decks, but it also can just steal a lot of useful things. I don't know what artifacts people will be playing in the new standard format, but if any deck relies on artifacts like equipment, Thieving Skydancer is going to counter them pretty hard. I mean, it's just mana efficient. You pay the same cost as their artifact. You just have to have the 2 extra to pay the Skydiver itself. Now, I don't know legacy formats well enough to say that I know there are powerful artifacts, but a lot of them are symmetrical, I think. So taking control of them are probably not going to get you very far. But if there are, I wouldn't be surprised to find out that they're like cheap 0 mana or 1 mana artifacts that are critical to your opponent's game plan, and just being able to take them on a creature like this is a pretty great deal, it seems like to me. So this, I think, has the best potential to see play in older, more powerful formats. Take that with a grain of salt. I've never played Legacy, so what do I really know? But the ability strikes me as particularly versatile and powerful, so I like it. And finally, our most powerful card, in my opinion, the one most likely to see play, is Nighthawk Scavenger. It's just a good card. The combination of abilities on here, Vampire Nighthawk, I believe was an old Zendikar one. I believe this is just a straight callback to an old Zendikar creature. It was same converted mana cost, 2 black and a colorless, for a 2/3 flying Death Touch lifelink. This obviously is pretty much the exact same card, but instead of being a 2/3, it is a 1/3, but it gets +1 equal to the number of cards equal to number of card types in your opponent's graveyard. They have, as soon as they have a card in their graveyard, this is Vampire Nighthawk Plus. It's a rogue, so it's going to trigger milling from the other rogues that trigger mill, so it's going to fill up your opponent's graveyard pretty nicely, and it's just great value. Like, Death Touch lifelink, it's 3 toughness, so that's nice. Doesn't get shocked very easily. And it's going to beat your opponent in the face better than Vampire Nighthawk ever did. I don't know what else to expect from a 3-cost creature. Evasion, removal, lifelink, kills your opponent. It's no Tarmogoyf. I'm not going to pretend that it's going to grow as big and effectively as a Tarmogoyf does, because this doesn't count your own graveyard. You can't just fill up your graveyard with fetch lands and instants and sorceries. You can't build your deck to support Tarmogoyf. But it's going to be like a 4/3 flying lifelink Death Touch for 3 mana. Like, it's not hard to imagine it being 3 and 4 power. And at that point, it's already really good. If you ever get to the point where your opponent's got 4 cards in their discard, you're stacking them for 5 lifelink. I think it's an incredible deal, and I think it's going to show up in pretty much every black deck that can hit double black. That's going to be the key, is being able to hit the double black. If the format turns out to be one where you're playing 4-color decks, and I don't know if it will or will not, if 4-color decks are prevalent, then maybe players can't hit double black reliably enough to play the Scavenger. But even then, it's going to be a strong argument to consider playing 3 or 2 colors instead. You have to weigh if the advantage of having a 4th color and the spells you get from it are worth being able to not being able to cast Vampire or a Nighthawk Scavenger. So I think it's incredible. I wasn't expecting to see Vampire Nighthawk of all cards get straight outclassed, but here we are. I think Scavenger is going to wreck a lot of people. I actually think he's just going to eat a bunch of removal, but hey, call the Death Dwellers into the format. You can just put it back into play, so I fully expect to see him ruining people's game. All right, and finally, we're going to just check out some of the art for some of these cards. I really liked the direction for some of them. Did not care for a lot of the showcase cards that are very high contrast, I guess, how I would describe them. There are alternate arts for some of the cards. You'll see, not here, but in the set when you play, you'll see some alternate arts that are very bright and dark, and I didn't like the aesthetic for those, but I liked a lot of the other depictions. I think it was really neat seeing connections between the land cards and their creature halves for the modal double face cards. You would see a lot of interconnection between the 2 arts from the front side to the back side, so that was pretty neat. And I mean, Zendikar's just got a pretty cool aesthetic to it. So let's look in no particular order. I went in alphabetical. I don't want to say any one art is better than the other. This is all subjective, so you can take or leave my opinion as you want. But here's some of the neat art that I found. You got Angel of Destiny. I really like the 3-wing effects. I think the lighting for this is pretty neat. The card's all right. I'm sure some people will try and play with it. It's probably a bigger deal in Commander where you can do some more shenanigans and straight wind conditions are more important. But I mean, it's a cool pose. The staff's pretty neat with the interlocking rings. Angels in Zendikar have this band. Their halo is over their eyes, kind of like a blinder or a blindfold. It's a cool style, and the wings are really neat. They've got the triple layer, but they're two-toned as well. So I like the colors and setup for this one. Blood Chief's Thirst, we actually saw this card earlier for one of the interesting designs. I like the art style for this one too. A lot of the vampire cards have very stark contrast with this bright red and then black and other pale tones. I think it really pops on in like the paper card. It'll be easy to distinguish the features of the card on the table. The contrast is just really nice. And this is across quite a few different vampire cards in here. You see this strong red and black. I thought it looked really, really neat. We've got one of the pathway cards. This is an incomplete cycle in Zendikar. They don't have the full 10. I think there are 6 different pathways in Zendikar, and hopefully we'll see the rest of the cycle elsewhere. But these are basically lands that you can play either A side or B side, which is really intriguing to me because there's really not a lot of opportunity cost to playing these cards in your deck. You can basically just replace any planes with 4 Bright Climb pathways at no cost to you, other than them not being a basic, which is rarely relevant, but maybe people will play that Hagra card that punishes non-basics. We'll see. But I liked the contrast and parallel between this front half and back half. The light and dark contrast is neat to me. The parallel of the pathway through the art. It's just a really cool setting. They remind me a lot of John Avon, because he frequently in his lands, he would describe the layout of the lands as having a destination point and drawing your eye through the artwork. And this Bright Climb pathway absolutely does that with this streak of light, unshadowed, going through from the text box all the way up to the top. And you get the same with the bottom. You have these kind of curved pathways from the bottom up to the top. Plus, you get the whole sense of scale. These people are pretty small in the artwork, so it gives you a good kind of grandiose sense of how big the formations of these floating continents are in Zendikar. I just really like the aesthetic for it. The art was well done. Next, we have a bit of a silly one, Inordinate Rage. We've got a moose minotaur. The moose antlers are very interesting to me. I don't think I've seen that before. But I like this art because it's playful and it plays off of this idea of large creatures being skittish around small rodents, but it applies it to a sentient large creature. Like this minotaur probably shouldn't be skittish, but it is inordinately angry. So good artwork for it, good visual joke, I think. Plus we get moose minotaur for a nice change. I wonder if that is explicitly canon. I don't recall seeing a minotaur with moose antlers in original Zendikar, but I don't remember how many minotaur I actually saw. So this might be an invention they added for the return to Zendikar. It might just be a thing the artist did. It was like, you know what? I'm going to draw this creature with the moose antlers. Next we have Nissa of Shadowed Boughs. I like this one. This is the alternate showcase art for Nissa. I believe this is the version you get if you did the play tokens for draft on Arena pre-purchase pack. If you got the extra pre-release events. I like this one because it just looks like a good adventurer's outfit for her. I just like the way the cloth looks. It's a nice cohesive color scheme. It's got a little bit of contrast with the blue, but it really, really all looks like it's the same tone. And if I recall, this is a part of 3 different kind of, I guess they'd be like a triptych. I don't think it's 3, but it's these planeswalkers, Nissa, Jace, and Nahiri each have a card style like this where the planeswalker looks like this, but if you look at a larger version of the artwork, you can see scenes being depicted in kind of still life that are kind of story beats, and they're presented kind of panel by panel. Not exactly as a triptych, because I think there are 3 in each, but they're very cool representations in a neat style. All this kind of sepia tone sort of approach. I liked how they looked, and I think Nissa looks the best to me of all of them, just because I like how her character looks. The outfit's really, really neat to me. Next up, I have Seagate Stormcaller. I really thought that this was a Raymond Swanland art because of the glow and the swirls. It looks very much like his style, but I was pleased to find another artist, Anna, doing this one. It looks cool. It's a cool pose. It's the swirls. The composition's all very nice. I like how it looks in the extended frame too. I'm not always keen on the way the extended frames look, but this one I think has good fading. It's dark at the top, so it kind of fades out into the background. But yeah, it's a good use of light. I liked it. Another good use of color is Sajiri Glacier. I liked how cold this one looks. The really faded colors, even before I realized that it said glacier on it, I was like, that place looks cold. You've got dark outer edges and then a warmer glow right around the character. Kind of brings that sense of like shelter right around you. And the card has a nice callback to the original Sajiri step, which was basically the same effect. The card would provide protection to a creature when it came into play for the turn. So people would fetch it up to attack with their Reliquary Knight sort of deal. Get a big attack in that can't be blocked because you've got protection. But art style looks very similar. I just really like how the two faces for this one look. Next up, we've got Soul Shatter. This artist is the one that I was very pleased to see. I haven't seen their style before, but it's very distinctive, I think you could agree, with the line work, the fading on the colors, and just orientation for it. Kind of a classic dragon and lance sort of fighting. It's like someone spearing the dragon through with a lance or like a direct bolt. So very well done, Wiley Beckert. I hope to see a lot more art from this artist in coming sets. Kind of like, it reminds me a lot of Seb McKinnon's work. Showed up all of a sudden, and basically everyone agreed that it was unique, stood out from everything, and looked very cool. I think this is a very similar case. People have already recognized how distinctive the art is, and I hope to see a lot more of it. And then we've got Tangled Florahedron. I picked this one out just because I think the idea for this plant elemental encompassing this hedron is really cute. It's just kind of like it's like a mascot sort of character. Tags along with the adventuring party. Kind of regret that it doesn't have the clause on it that it counts as a warrior, rogue, cleric, or wizard. That would be cute if maybe too powerful. I don't think it would have been. But yeah, the idea that an elemental has taken over this hedron for its magical purposes is really cute. It's got a little butterfly on its hand limb here. And then finally, I grabbed Throne of Makindi. I like the scale on this one again. The pillar is very tall, the dynamic angle, it's kind of slanted, bright obscuring light at the center of the throne. It just all kind of comes together very nicely. Looks very big, grand sort of thing for the setting. Lots of other artwork. It's all subjective, so if you have your own favorites, that's cool. Everyone's got pet artists that they prefer to see art from too. Different things for everyone. But yeah, that wraps up the set review. I am looking forward to the set. There's I've got like a half dozen deck ideas already to brew, so I'm anxious to put those up on the Jank tank. You won't see it this weekend, but next week I'll probably have assembled that Valakut Expeditions deck, and we'll see how much of a dumpster fire that turns out to be. And this weekend I will be playing as many pre-releases as I can cram in, so you can expect to see those coming up shortly, hopefully going up the first one on Monday. So look forward to that and enjoy your pre-releases. If you're interested in getting this set, it should be available now on Arena, and you should be able to still talk to your local game shops and order a box through them. The official release is this weekend. After the weekend ends, it won't go on sale until next Friday for the full release. You'll be able to buy draft boosters then. There will be limited collection set boosters. Stores won't have a full allocation for those yet, but Wizards should be getting those out in the coming weeks for for full orders. The set boosters are pretty neat. They've got more full art stuff, foils, throwback cards from previous sets in them. So those are going to be pretty fun to crack. But yeah, the Arena client should be updated by now. You should be able to log in and get to it. So maybe I'll see you in one of the pre-release events.